Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show where I talk about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the series premiere of Prodigal Son. A great series premiere, a great way to kind of start off the show. There's a lot of interesting things they kind of already hit us off with. Obviously, in this episode, we get introduced to Malcolm. It's kind of interesting how they do tell the story of, like, obviously it starts off in 98, where his dad Martin gets arrested for being a serial killer known as the surgeon. Now Malcolm is grown up and he works at the FBI. He's a profiler. Interesting things. Malcolm is played by Tom Payne, which is weird to see him with the shorter hair because I'm so used to seeing him with long hair because of him playing Jesus on The Walking Dead. So it's still just kind of a little bit of like kind of get a little adjusting to, which is also interesting to me. Actually think about it too, because obviously because I now know that he does have an accent because he's a British actor, if I'm not mistaken. So it's kind of interesting to know that him and Michael Sheen are doing American accents for this. So it's just kind of funny to think about that. But also it's interesting too, like Michael Sheen being this serial killer, because obviously before this, I'm coming off of seeing him in Good Omens, which this is like a 180 from that if you've seen Good Omens. So it's just interesting, so. But regardless, it's interesting because, Malcolm is very, you can make the argument, well, it kind of ends up getting him in trouble, but basically, he's very narcissistic to a certain extent, like certain qualities from his dad, he's kind of taken them, but kind of tried to do a positive thing with them. Whereas his dad took those qualities and kind of went down a serial killer route. It's like, oh, I'm going to go down the profiler route. And obviously, he's catching this, in particular, they're hunting this other serial killer. And Malcolm was able to get the guy to kind of lay his, gun down. But in that moment, the sheriff that's involved in the investigation shoots the bad guy. And it's like, oh, I got him. I saved your life and everything. But obviously Malcolm wasn't as receptive to it. He wasn't thankful. He got super pissed because it's like, you killed this man in cold blood. And he's like, I'm a hero. It's like, yeah, but you're a cold-blooded hero. And I think because of stuff that Malcolm says later on, because for him, it's like, I think it's a combination of one, no matter how much of a terrible thing you've done, I don't think in his eyes you necessarily deserve to die, especially because it's like, hey, I was literally, disarming him. He was lowering his gun. You could have just arrested him. But I think it's because for him, he talks about it later on, the reason why he became an FBI profiler is to capture people like his dad. And I think maybe every serial killer he takes down is kind of in a psychological means a representation of his dad, So, he literally has a definition of daddy issues. So I'm wondering, is that kind of what they're kind of playing into? Like maybe every bad guy he's taken down. So seeing this particular guy die is like seeing his dad get killed because his dad is a serial killer and also a bad, so maybe that's where that kind of resonates, why it kind of set him off. Or maybe he is just someone of no, he was dropping his gun no matter what he's done, there's due process and whatnot. Either way, it's many things like this, and the thing in particular is punching the sheriff in the face. I think it was maybe him going oh, I saved your life, son. That right there pissed him off, but I'm sure it's a combination of everything. But apparently Malcolm's kind of done some stuff, a whole bunch of stuff. So it's like, hey, the FBI's kind of fired him because of his dad, because it's like, we're kind of worried that this job's taking too much out of you. You're bringing up tendencies kind of similar to your dad. So it's like, yeah, we're firing you. So that's interesting. So he's out of a job, but then there's the whole thing. It's interesting too, I'm skipping all over the place, but it's interesting when we get an introduction to his family. I need to look into it, but the actress who plays his sister Ainsley, she looks familiar. I just can't place her. I know the actress who plays his mom is Bellamy Young. She played the president's wife in the TV show Scandal. I've only seen 3 seasons of Scandal, and that was a while back, so a lot of Scandals kind of a little dissipated from my head because it was a couple years ago when I saw those 3 seasons. So regardless, that's kind of what I best know her from. So I think this is kind of, obviously that's kind of the last thing she did. It was I feel like she's best known for, because obviously it's a whole thing. I'm not about to go down that route, but it's just interesting when you look at the dynamic of his family. For one, his sister being a reporter, it seems like it kind of, in a weird way, it makes sense. She was so young at the time. She was only 5 years old at the time their dad got arrested, so it didn't have the impact on her that obviously it's had a massive effect on Malcolm. But I think you could make the argument, well, Malcolm went down the route of, I'm going to be a profiler, where she was I'm going to be a reporter. So I think both of them kind of went the more she probably wants to get the truth out there because coming from a life where it's like so much was hidden from them, probably want to expose the truth, spread the news on when bad people are taken down. So maybe you could make the argument that's her, because everyone in the family has their way of dealing with things, and their mom's way of dealing with things is pills. Like, she kind of has this like happy disposition, kind of like a wacky way, but I think that's just because for her, she is kind of broken. All of them are broken in their own way and trying to piece themselves together, trying to have some semblance of a normal family, but you kind of see the cracks in the disguise that they have. But for her, it's like, oh, I have all these different pills, and I've been having the Quaaludes. Yes, you shouldn't really take them if you really, 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 really need them, or if we're having a cocktail party, and it's like, he's like, pills aren't going to fix everything, Mom. And she's like, if you take enough pills. So for her, it's like, it's her way. It's a little bit of a quirkiness, but you can tell that quirkiness is a mask to hide like her way. She's had to deal with this for over 20 years, so you wouldn't be the most well-adjusted person after dealing with all of that, So it's understandable, her perspective, and she does look after her kids. It's like, no, I don't have to worry about Ainsley. Ainsley's perfect. You are the one I have to worry about. And he even made a reference. He's like, you want me to drink this tea? What is it laced with? And she's like, love. And I'm like, you didn't necessarily get, because at first I'm like, oh, it's because your mom's trying to slip stuff in your drink to make you feel better, try to mellow you out and make you feel better. But it's like, no, it's because it turns out it's kind of a twist, in a very twisted way. I'm sure it's that, but you could also look at it as kind of like a play on the fact is that that Martin drugged people. He put ketamine in their tea. That's how he killed that's how he drugged his victims. So it's in a twisted way. It's almost like you could look at it as like a inside joke. So it kind of shows you like how twisted their family is to a certain extent. That's how some people deal with tragedy. It's not just in like a comedy sense, but also it's like a defense mechanism sense. So I think that kind of resonates with me to a little bit of an extent, because I have my little quirky defense mechanism. When shit kind of gets serious, I kind of get a little jokey, so I can kind of understand that to a certain extent. So I just thought that was kind of interesting. But what shows you kind of the depths of like I said, that this mask is cracked and everything. I love it. It's like, wait, why didn't you tell me you were working on this case? And like Ainsley is like, I did a report about it. Don't you watch my reports? And she's like, yeah, but not with her mom's like, yeah, not with the volume on. And it's just almost like, that's shitty of you just to say to me, Mom. She didn't say it, but she had that look like, well, that's just, it's like, okay, like, or I don't, you could take that as like, oh, okay, sure, I think it's that thing of like, probably Malcolm always got the attention because he was kind of the one that's most damaged, which Ainsley's probably like, I'm just as damaged as he is, Mom. I mean, probably not as damaged, because Malcolm's definitely got his issues, but I think for her, it's a thing of like, no, like, how do I put it? That might play into their story of like, she wants a little bit more attention from their mom, because for the past 20 years Malcolm's always got the attention, which we kind of find out a little bit more like around the circumstances of Martin's arrest, of like what probably potentially we'll get to that soon enough. But I just think that's kind of interesting. But like I said, the showing you the depths of this whole thing, it's like she knows, like in the moment he mentions like, oh, the quartet, it's like boom, it's like their mom knows the names of the victims. It's like for the past 20 years, it's never left my mind, because it's like these poor people will never go home to their family because of my husband, because of your father. So it shows you, like I said, that this is some mask that they put on to kind of pretend like everything's okay. So it's almost this dark comedy in comedic elements to it that's kind of like, oh, that's weird that they do. But I think it is like a mask. It adds this element of just showing you like how messed up this family is and how they try to deal with it in a very imperfect way, because there is no perfect way to deal with these set circumstances. So we have that. We have this NYPD detective Gil, played by Lou Diamond Phillips, which prior to this, I'd say like, I think the most recent thing I saw him in was playing Henry and Longmire. I think it's the most recent. I want to say that's the most recent thing. I think from Longmire to this, for me, I don't know if he's done anything necessarily in between. Regardless, doesn't matter. It's just it is for me. But he brings Malcolm onto a case because it's like, oh, you got fired by the FBI. It's like, right, you don't want to mention the whole your dad being a serial killer thing. Don't worry about it. I'm gonna keep that to myself. Get introduced to the other detectives that's working with him, Danny and JT. We kind of get a look at how Malcolm approaches crime scenes. That obviously he steps into the mind of a killer, and now it makes you wonder: is that just a byproduct of the way his dad raised him and taught him? Or did he kind of were there like remnants of that element there when he was young, but maybe he fostered that element more and more because to kind of deal with his dad's situation. It's like, I'm gonna capture bad people like my dad, so he fostered it and to the point it turned into what it is. Or was it always like this and he tried to turn it into, like I said, something positive? Whereas his dad kind of went the more the straight up serial killer route, he's trying to go down the hero route. Regardless of the whole situation, it is kind of interesting. I was like, oh, the timing on this is interesting because it's like, oh, this case that you end up getting involved in is a case that's a copycat of murders committed by your dad in 1992, because apparently his dad killed 23 people. This is a particular ones in 92. It was a string known as the Quartet. So it's like, okay, so there's been 3 victims, but there's supposed to be a 4th one, so this is a copycat, so we can expect a 4th victim in all of this. Gil had an idea that this might be related, but he had to bring in Malcolm to be sure, because if anyone's going to know the case better, for one, Malcolm's very good at what he does as a profile, but also if anyone's going to know this case the way he does, he would. And because it seems like he studied this in and out. Probably as he got older, it is a case that he circled back to. I'm curious, was it 100% on his own, or was it through conversations with his dad? Because it seems like he kept a relationship up with his dad up until 10 years ago, back in 2009, prior to the story. Because we even saw him as a kid being like, Dad, why did you do that? And his dad being like, well, I don't know if there is really, I don't really have an answer. I don't know if there really is an answer. He's like, but they say that you're a monster. It's like, oh, Malcolm, my boy, there is no such thing as monsters. And it's like, oh, now that's an interesting statement. So, I also like that the medical examiner, we get introduced to Idrissa, which it seems like she's kind of got that morbid side of things. So she's like, oh my God, I get to examine cases, these bodies that are kind of similar to the surgeons. And then her and Malcolm meet. And I love Malcolm comes in and it's and JT leans over to Danny and he's like, so we're saying, we know that he's it's 100% guaranteed that he's the actual killer in all this, right? And then also him and Idrissa kind of hit it off because he's like, oh my God, your her work on the bodies, it's what was it? I forgot his wording. With he said that she's Picasso with formaldehyde, and she kind of took it as a compliment. She's like, oh, thanks. And she's like, you're so slender. And he's like, yeah, that's because most foods make me sick. And I thought that was such an interesting thing because it seemed like she was kind of holy shit. It seemed like there was almost in a weird way a kind of almost morbid flirting between them. Because even JT was leaning on to Danny what the hell is going on right now? So I thought that was just kind of interesting. But it turns out this is all connected to BDSM because the marks on their arms are things that happened before the killing. So that's what this is what connects all 3 of the victims, because it seems like other than this, they weren't connected. So obviously Malcolm makes his profile about the killer. So that was kind of interesting, realizing that this all deals with that world. They track down the Dom that they had in common. His name is Nico. Go there, but it turns out he's not the killer. He's actually kind of potentially set up to be the next victim. He's in a chair with a bomb and everything. And it's like, okay, so what do we do? And then Malcolm with a little bit of glee in his face. Not just a little, a whole bunch of glee. It's like, I'm going to have to cut off your arm. And Nico's like, wait, what? And does it so. It's almost like he had a prep and so it's like, oh, okay, I got this. And they were luckily able to get out of there before the bomb went off. And Danny's like, are you okay? And he's like, yes, I got to go give that guy a hand. It's like, you're making such an inappropriate joke right now. Once again, it's just the weird way people, I guess, handle things. But obviously, now that his mom knows it, not only is he working on a case, it's also a case, connected to his father, actually a copycat of his father. And then, she's like, don't go to him because he's a cancer, Which we also, it's something I even touched on too, is like from the very beginning we learned that, you know, Malcolm has night terrors to the point he has to put a mouth guard in, I guess just to make sure he doesn't like bite down on his own tongue or something during his night terrors. But even like chaining himself to his bed and stuff like that. Even his mom being like, oh no, I changed your sheets and everything, so it's all good. So I guess she knows about that. Like obviously it's probably something he's dealt with ever since then, you know. He gets like tremors and stuff like that too. Because even at one point, Gil's like, are the tremors back? So it seems like they probably went away. But I guess like all this stress, losing his job, it's probably that thing of like kind of like a similar to a Sherlock Holmes thing, whereas like Sherlock had his thing about, you know, in particular I'm referencing the CBS show. In that particular case, he has his, you know, heroin addiction. Working kept his mind preoccupied and let him to kind of, you know, work became his means of dealing with his addiction. Maybe the same thing applies in Malcolm's case, like work kind of kept him, you know, from falling too deep into this. But obviously, like, this being a case so closely tied to his dad brings back memories, because the fact of the matter is he hasn't seen his dad in the past 10 years because he walked away. Even his dad, you know, they're having conversations and stuff like that about, what was it, like Dahmer and stuff like that. And it's like, yeah, like there was no room for groceries because of all that, like, body parts he had stashed in the refrigerator. And then, you know, his dad makes a joke of like, that was the like dinner, or that was they were groceries or something like that, something morbid like that. So but he had this night terror attack in the police station, and it was almost sweet. Like Danny was there to kind of calm him down. Like, it's okay. Literally, all the cops pull the guns out. She's like, no, it's good. It's like, hey, you're okay, you're good. Obviously, Gil's like, obviously you're not good, but I'm bringing you into this, and I wish I didn't bring you into this, because now you want to go see your dad, because it turns out that the killer had drawings that were at Nico's place that he ended up leaving behind because he had to run away, that are exactly from his dad. So it's like, oh, his dad drew these and gave them to the killer. But then it turns out, no, well, he goes to visit his dad. So that in itself ends up being an interesting thing. Because we go back to kind of like that morbid humor where his dad is like talking about the fact is, it's like, oh man, you kind of look a little terrible, Malcolm. And Malcolm's like, yeah, it's kind of messed up. I look terrible, but you look great. He's like, well, I went vegan and I haven't seen your mother in 20 years. It's almost like a sitcom line. And it's like, what? And he says it with a chuckle and everything. And then he talks about the fact is like, oh no, the reason why those drawings got out is because I was robbed. This is an outrage. And Malcolm's like, and there were also 3 people murdered. And he's like, yeah, you know, obviously that's an outrage. I mean, there can be multiple outrages right now. It's like his responses is just kind of like, I wasn't expecting this, like, I think it's meant to bring some humanity to the character, not making it like such a stoic thing. I guess it's also probably because obviously you can think of this as kind of having some like very Hannibal vibes, not just like the Hannibal movies, but even just the TV show itself. You know, because obviously there's similar elements, but so I guess it's supposed to stand out, like kind of making him in a twisted way, kind of adding this charm to him. And I guess that's supposed to be the point, because he seemed like any normal dude. And I guess that's the point, to make you go like, okay, like if you kind of like, if you didn't know about the serial killer aspect, you think, oh, he's just some cheerful, normal dad. And it's just like the way he smiles, like everything's okay. But then you think like, well, maybe everything's okay because it's all part of a plan and everything. So you have Malcolm being like, okay, he narrows it down to 2 people, because it's like, oh yeah, this person's dead because you know this person died during surgery, and Martin's like, well, not everyone's perfect or something like that. But he narrows it down to 2 people, and it's like, you help me with this, I'll promise you I'll come back. So he gives him a hand. He meets up. Malcolm meets up with Danny at the party and everything. And it's like, oh crap, my mom's there. Yeah, it might be a better idea that you do pull your gun out. So they separate, but I have to look into this. Is the actor who played Carter the actual killer in this case? Is that the actor who played Professor Pig, or just the Pig? I think comic book wise he's Professor Pig, but the Pig in Gotham season 4. If so, it looks like it's the same actor. I could be 100% wrong. He might just look similar to him, but it's like, that'd be kind of interesting, because obviously, you know, Gotham was a Fox, so this is a Fox show, so it's just kind of interesting if that ended up being the case, because the Pig was a serial killer, so it's just kind of interesting. It's almost kind of like a sad form of typecasting. Regardless, you get what I'm trying to say, which is interesting, because I think the actor who plays who played Victor Zsasz, is kind of in that situation too, where he kind of gets typecast as a bad guy with it, regardless. I mean, that's me going on a tangent and whatnot. But, I mean, it's actually kind of sad because this whole situation is about, because, Malcolm had talked about it, it's about revenge. That basically the reason why he picked these particular murders or quartets is because he's trying to do an experiment, trying to find the most painful way to torture someone. The cause pain, that this is what this is all about. Because it turns out that basically he's into BDSM, his wife is, and all that. Basically, he suffered from a heart attack, and obviously that's how he met Martin, and Martin helped him, surgery and recovery. So obviously all that. So that's where they kind of bought some kinship. But also the fact is, this is about getting revenge on his wife Blair because she cheated on him with Nico by going to another dom after he had, in your moment of weakness, as Malcolm was kind of saying it, she went to someone else. So that's what this is all about. But he's threatening to kill Dina. I said Dina, I meant Danny. And, Malcolm does what he thinks is the only way to do it. It's like, oh, look at me. It's like, no, that needle with all that is made specifically for Blair. It's, his compulsion of like, I got to complete things, this way. And if you kill yourself with this needle, it's going to ruin everything. He's like, but doing me would be almost like a grand finale in its own, because it's like, hey, the person that you get all this inspiration from is my dad, and he talks about the fact is that because of his dad, he, like I said, went down this route to try and catch killers, because it wasn't his dad he was afraid of, it was himself, because he was afraid what was in his dad was in him and that he would be capable of it. So I have to take what's in me, that potential evil, and do something good with it. It's kind of like the whole point. But and luckily JT and Gil showed up in time, but Danny was like, okay, you really weren't like, if they hadn't shown up, you weren't going to do that, right? He's like, of course not. That'd be crazy. And I think, and it's sad, you can tell he was serious about it, because for him it's like, I deserve to be punished because that's my dad, that evil is in me. So if I, like, you'd be almost doing him a service, because for him it's like, he's not a normal person. He'll never be normal because of a combination of everything that went down because of his dad, but also because of probably some genetic aspects of his dad passed down to him. So it's like, he was almost looking for a way out. He's always looking for a way out. That's probably why he is so reckless when it comes to cases and stuff like that, because you're probably doing him a favor by taking him out of his own misery, just being who he is. Probably certain aspects of like, he's not comfortable in his own skin, like is what he was saying about Carter, but maybe on some level that kind of applied to himself. He can't live with himself with all, like I said, this family in general has had to carry this shame of like what he did. They're trying to be like, no, that was him, this is us, like we're separated from it, but it still, even 20 years later, will forever have a hold on it, even to the point that Malcolm literally gets a different name, but still, So Gil ends up telling JT and Danny the story that it was actually Malcolm who turned his own dad in, because he found a chest with the body and everything. He called Gil. Gil kind of thought it was like a prank call, and so his dad was preparing him the tea and whatnot. But at that moment, Malcolm was like, you need to take out your gun because my dad's going to kill you. And, he took down his own father. And I think, because that's Gil being like, that he's one of us. He might be a little weird, but he's one of us. He not only saved countless lives that night by turning his father in, doing something like that in itself is a hard thing. And I'm sure that's what, there's a messed up struggle with, like, you did the right thing, but you also sent your father to prison. Like, that conflictedness, I'm sure exists heavily, and that's something I'm sure we're going to heavily kind of dive into. But for Gil, it's like, he saved my life and many people's lives that night doing what he did, so. And also it seemed like, obviously at the time of him getting the candy from Gil in the past, it seemed like as he was walking down the street present day, he was putting a piece of candy in. So it was almost kind of like I think maybe that's kind of a celebratory type of thing of like a reminder, kind of like, whereas serial killers kind of have like their psychopathy and like what would be the right word? Like the reason, like they have a particular type of victim and this and that, and the reasonings, like maybe they're recreating something, maybe he does the same thing kind of on the opposite end. When he takes down a killer, he brings himself back to that moment of kind of being rewarded for, so maybe that's what that is. Maybe it's not. I don't know. But I think that's such an interesting element. And obviously that's something JT and Danny are going to have to get used to. And like knowing like, hey, your dad's this, it's like, but you're a good guy, or you're not. Like he's a bit of an oddball. So that's something they're going to have to deal with. Obviously like he meets up with his dad, but it's still the thing of like, okay, so how did Carter know what specific book to steal what specific pages from to kind of do his thing, not unless you gave them to him? Like, has this whole thing been some elaborate plan to get me back into your life? And he's like, what? No, I would never do that. But when you see the smile on his face when Malcolm is leaving, it's like, no, that's the thing. Was it all planned? Was it not? I'm leaning to hell yes it was. A very orchestrated plan, just because it's like he said, like how would he know specifically what books, that would allow, because for him to have stolen from the books without him knowing, it's like, how would you know out of the countless books there to get this specific book in these specific pages, So there is definitely something there. But he's making a point to be like, oh, the fact is you were in my life. I don't want to lose you in my life again. So it's like, hey, let's work together to catch serial killers. So it's, like I said, I went into this knowing that being the premise, but it's still interesting with everything stacked on top of it to know how we got here. So I'm very interested to kind of continue watching the show, kind of see where things go, what the cases look like, what kind of, dynamic this whole situation between, Martin and Malcolm. Like I said, especially like the family dynamic. I'm really interested to dive into it, especially like, for now he's saying like, it's a one-time thing. He's not coming to see his dad again, but obviously we know that's going to change. And what's that going to mean for his mom and sister? That's something he's going to be hiding from them, but eventually they're going to find out. Gil's not going to be too happy about this. I wonder, is he going to hide this from JT and Danny? Because if they found out, they'd look at him differently. Danny's kind of warmed up to him. JT's still kind of like, but I mean, from the beginning, Gil was kind of like, yeah, you and JT aren't going to get along. But regardless, I mean, him and Adrisa are kind of getting along. I am curious, like, if she finds out that he is the son of the surgeon, would that kind of make her go, oh, wow, really? Like, would she have a lot of questions? Side note, I just thought about this, too. It's interesting. They literally dropped the title of the show in the first episode. I mean, like, I don't know why. It just kind of was like, oh, yeah, like, I don't think every show does that. I'm trying to think, like, it's a small thing to get caught up on, not in a bad thing. It's just kind of like, I just thought about it. Like, right, they said the title of the show in literally the first episode. I mean, I thought it was just going to be like that looming thing of like, that's what this is. I would have never actually expected them to actually say Prodigal Son in the show. But, I mean, still, regardless, like I said, I'm very interested to see where all of this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till next time, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.